Okay, hi Narasimhan. We are very excited to have you in our session on SOC today.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you, Sana. Really nice to meet all of you on this Saturday evening or
yes, and
morning in case you're outside of India.
absolutely. And I'm sure this evening will be really interesting and riveting. We have a huge number of people who have registered, and
Very
I'm
nice.
really looking forward to them jumping in. And I hope you also have an amazing session with us.
Sure.
Yeah. So, Narsimhan, as people join in, I would like to ask a few things like, um, you know, what do you feel about a SOC being implemented and accepted from small startups to big companies? How do you see the trend?
So, especially in the last 3 years,
Mhm.
I'm seeing a lot of traction in the requirement of SOC 2, especially. The
Okay.
simple reason is there are lot of business problems which startups are aiming to solve, and this problem is probably one small portion in the larger ecosystem in which enterprise customers or entities are operating. A simple example could be, I may want to have a end-to-end transportation management system for my warehousing company. Whereas
Right.
earlier it was not possible, today we have solutions to do that, right?
Correct.
Earlier, I was probably doing things on Excel spreadsheets,
Right.
whereas today I have automation suites and things to go ahead and do it. So I think it's
Right.
a combination, and it's a variety of things. And the more the number of startup companies are coming into this game,
Mm-hmm.
the more is the assurance element which customers require. Hey, I know you're a startup. How do I know that if I give my data to you, you're safe? How do I get a sense? Because in SaaS-based model, the data is hosted within that particular the SaaS company, right? Everything the SaaS company takes care. The data belongs to the end customer. So it's like, I am sharing my details to you. My very simple question is, how safe and secure are you going to keep it? I mean, you could say, I promise this, I promise that, but where is that assurance element? And that's where SOC comes in. So I think it's an exciting phase to be, and we have had very interesting engagements with our clients, customers, where a lot of fancy stuff we have been seeing. We are seeing a lot of, we are witnessing a lot of innovative business models, starting from AI, starting from code or code automation. I think the game is interesting, and it's just started, I feel.
Okay. So we're almost about to hit 7, and people have started joining in.
Lovely,
Thank you.
lovely, lovely.
We'll wait for another 2 minutes, and
Sure.
you can start fresh just to let the people know, whoever are joining the session, that we're just having an informal conversation. The main session will start exactly as promised at 7. Yeah.
That's lovely.
Okay. So, tell me another thing, Narasimhan. How do you see the difference in demand for both ISO and SOC? And I think many
Interesting.
of us would like to know that.
Yeah, while I'll cover that in the detail of our session, but maybe if I
Okay.
have to give a very small insight, right?
Hmm.
An ISO probably is considered today as a starting step. A SOC is considered to be a more mature assessment. For a simple reason, ISO is a certification, and SOC is an attestation or an audit. So the
It's like a
outcome of,
report,
yeah,
right?
the outcome of a audit is a report, and the
Yeah.
report talks about so many elements. So I think the people who rely on a SOC report fairly get more comfort on your system and processes rather than just looking into an ISO sort of a certificate. And the credentials behind an ISO versus a SOC, right? The SOC has fairly much more credentials plus the expectation, and only an AICP auditor can issue. So there are a lot of interesting things in that game.
Right, right. So we are exactly at 7. We welcome you for our session with Narasimhan today on SOC. It is a step by step approach, a warm welcome. We are streaming from both LinkedIn as well as from YouTube. So your
Lovely.
sessions are getting recorded. So don't worry, we totally feel that you should just relax and listen to this absolutely riveting session today. Make the most out of it. Recordings will be shared, forms will be shared, and at the end of the session, we will also talk about the freebie, the takeaway from this session. So be there with us, and over to you, Narsimhan. I will stream your presentation for today. Thank you.
Love it. Thank you. Okay, so I'm hoping that audience can see the presentation as well as myself. The audio, video, everything is set, and you're able to hear me clearly. With that as a confirmation, I will probably get started in a minute, right? So, hope everything is fine. Okay. So let me give you a perspective of what is going on in this world today so that you understand where SOC 2 comes to be a big differentiator. And that's the reason you can see that image as well, that SOC 2, that compliance is probably what I call it as this red color, icon, which is sort of merging both the ends. Today, there are so many startups, or I will probably put it as technology companies, who are trying to solve different unique problems. And the interesting game in this is that I am trying to solve a problem by using some sort of a technology, and a customer is happy that you're trying to solve the problem and he wants to adopt to your solution. But the biggest challenge which a customer has in the traditional model versus the modern tech world is that, hey, you own up the tech, you own up the software, you own up the infrastructure, and you take care of everything. But you are having my data. And we all know that the value of data is something which is, unimaginable today, right? So if you have my data, how secure is my data? What are you doing with my data? Are you compliant with so many questions I come up with? Regulatory requirements, all of those. And then comes a very interesting question. If you are compliant with this, right? Then comes a very interesting question. How do I ensure, or how do I independently verify that you are compliant with it? Right? That's the big question. So imagine a simple scenario that you go to a pizza store, and sometimes the pizza store, while doing the billing, he's asking your mobile number. Some of you say, hey, I'll give it. Some of you are a little skeptical. Hey, what is he going to do with my mobile number? Right? And that's data for him, because he would probably use that for his analytical purposes, sending you promotional campaigns and a lot more things. Now comes the interesting question. What if he further sells my data? Or what if the data in his system is not secure? These are the questions which are running into our mind by just ordering one pizza. And by the time we think of all of this, the pizza comes and we just forget our thoughts, right? But look at an enterprise customer, an organization, a B2B player. There is so much of ambiguity, there's so much of confusion. And how do I make sure that, hey, the data is safe and secure? And that's where one of these interesting, I would not use the word certification, I would call it as auditing requirements, right? Called as a SOC 2 comes into play. Right? I know there are a lot of questions on what is SOC 2, what is ISO, what is PCI. We'll come to each of them and why SOC 2 is considered to be probably a gold standard when it comes to these sort of cybersecurity aspects, and we'll address that as well, right? So before we get started, I'm Narsimhan from Ken & Co. We are a CPA firm domiciled in USA, Montana, and we are a CPA firm who can attest SOC reports, right? So that's the background and context, in addition to doing a lot of other fancy stuff which you see onto the screen. As I said, we are, our members, our colleagues, our players, our team members, our members have members with AICPA, ISACA, Institute of Internal Auditors, or we are IS 27001 lead auditors, basically having a sense of what digital risk is and technology risk is. We are domiciled even in India. We have a firm in Bangalore and entity established in Montana. Right. So that's a quick background about us, and of course, I'll take you through a few experiences and interesting challenges which we have come across. So a little bit of an animation to get started. I understand boring PPTs, but yeah, I will have some bit of text as well. But nevertheless, to get started, today you have a customer, right? And we call the customer in the SOC journey as a user entity. is called as a user entity. Remember this word, right? In simple language, your customer. Your customer today, right? He is outsourcing certain activities, or he's probably cloud sourcing, meaning he is he doesn't want to do certain activities and gives it to you as an organization, you, your company, or he believes that you have a solution which is hosted on the cloud, and therefore that solution can help solve his problem. And what could the solution be? Just a few examples. It could be he outsources payroll processing to you, or he can outsource an accounting or a bookkeeping service to you, or he may be a healthcare company. He or she is outsourcing claims, BPO processing services to you. Or it could also be something to do with, support, a ticketing software, right? Or a cloud hosted application or a SaaS solution, right? All of these, the user entity is outsourcing it to an organization like this. A simple use case is an organization wants to use an email service. Earlier, if I had to use an email service, the requirement was I need to have an email service or an email server into my ecosystem. Today, I don't even think we think about it, right? All that I do is purchase a domain, go to the DNS configuration, update my IP address, go to Google, right? Or go to Microsoft or Zoho, whomever you feel, link both of them and get started. Here is your email, right? But the sense is you as an organization are using the services which is mentioned on the right hand side of the image. So question is, how can I be sure that these service providers or these entities are having certain internal controls or are taking care of safety, are taking care of security, are taking care of privacy, right? So one option is you ask that question to them. He or she will give an answer. We take your privacy seriously, we do not share this information, we do this, blah blah blah. But the question is that the real scenario? How does that work? And that is where you want a third party to give that a sort of an assurance. And that is not just you as an end customer. Your end customers' auditors could be asking this, right? Your end customer could be asking this, or your internal users called as GRC, whatever, all those players could be asking it. So all of these folks require a comfort about how this entity, whatever your service, you've outsourced to, is probably going through it. In simple language, coming back to my use case, you as an organization want to get a comfort how Gmail is secure, right? So option one, you ask Google, and Google provide you certain policies pertaining to Google, right? Or option two, here it is, right? This player called as Google appoints a person called as a service auditor. And this service auditor issues a report called as a SOC 1, a SOC 2, or a SOC 3. And this SOC report, whatever the 1, 2, 3 which I'm referring to, is a report which gives some sort of an assurance, which gives some sort of clarity, saying that, hey, that my controls or the controls which is operating in Google is reasonably safe, secure, and is probably compliant with ABC requirements. And who gets that comfort? The users of the report whom you see on the extreme left, right? These are probably, it could be the auditors of your company, it could be your customers, or it could be your internal stakeholders, right? So all of them, right? Of course, I'll give you a little more demystified example in the slides to come. So many of them ask, hey, SOC, I heard this word in cybersecurity, SOC, NOC, right? And here I'm looking about one more SOC. What is this? So SOC and NOC is a little different from the service organization, what we speak of, or the systems and organization controls we speak of, right? SOC and NOC are basically 24 hours or 24/7 monitoring service to see if any threat is, somebody is trying to attack or penetrate your system. Whereas on the other end, we're talking about a SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3. This refers to service organization controls, right? In this entire example, the entities whom you see in these two curves, which is payroll, bookkeeping, healthcare support, these entities are referred to as service organization. right? On the left hand side, which could be your company which is wanting to achieve a SOC 2 compliance. On the left hand side, what you see is your customer, also referred to as user entity. And on the extreme right, whom you see as service auditor, is Ken and Co CPA LLC, right? Is we are a service auditor where startups or companies appoint us as a service auditor to give an assurance that hey, my controls, my system, and organization is intact, right? And this is where an interesting terminology comes up: a SOC 1, SOC 2, and a SOC 3. What is the difference between all the three, right? So, if you are doing activities relating to financial processing, we typically go for a report called as a SOC 1. If you are doing something to do with any other activity or non-financial activity, we normally go for a SOC 2, right? Where we are going a little more broader and in depth. Of course, I'll cover the differences in the slides to come, right? But that's the perspective which you need to have. And just to give a quick recap of the slide, A, you are a company who's providing services to other clients, a typical B2B scenario, or maybe even a B2C scenario. They want to get a comfort that whether you as an organization are following the right security practices and protocols, and therefore you as an organization appoint a service auditor who's a CPA, right, to issue either a SOC 1 or a SOC 2 or a SOC 3 report, right? And that is a report and it's not a certification, unlike your ISO 27001, which we'll come to it in a few slides from now. Okay. Many of them presume that SOC stands for Service Organization Controls, right? The answer is no. This was the definition very many years back. Later on, the AICPA, which is the competent authority here, they modified SOC to mention a system and organization controls. It's basically a audit report. I repeat the words, hear me out clearly. It's an audit report issued by only a CPA firm, right? Of course, a firm can also be an individual entity. We'll come to that a little later. Issued by a CPA firm, which gives an opinion about two things: the controls operating in the service provider. And who is the service provider in this context? I told you, service organization, right, which is your company. And this opinion is on two things: it's on a design and operating effectiveness. I repeat, it's on a design and operating effectiveness. What is the difference between a design and operating effectiveness? Hang on, we'll go one step at a time, right? The precursor to this is what happened in the Sarbanes-Oxley Act 2002, right? A lot of public companies were responsible for maintaining an effective system of internal controls. And they said, hey, if you are a public company, which means you're a listed company, you are now outsourcing certain activities to ABC, make sure that ABC is also having a proper set of internal controls. And what is an internal control? In a layman's language, a simple mechanism to ensure that something is prevented before it goes wrong, right? That's as simple as that. Now, these internal control reports give an assurance to whoever is the user that the risk within you is sort of taken care, right? But fast forward in 2023, right, and over a point of this last couple of decades, we have noticed that there are a lot more non-financial activities also which is outsourced. And that is where, interestingly, SOC 2 came into picture over a point in time, which is not focused purely on financial controls, which it goes beyond, right? And of course, we will see how that journey is. So let's take a very simple illustrative case. We're talking about three buckets over here. The extreme left bucket is your customer. As I told you, he or she is referred to as user entity. Then you have a central pillar, which is your company, your organization, popularly referred in this context as service organization. I repeat, service organization. And then on the extreme right, you have a service provider whom you use for providing the services to your customer. To give an example, in this case, assuming you are a company called as Dropbox, right? And Dropbox is providing services to, let's say, a company called as Xerox or LinkedIn, or for that matter, Ministry of Security, right? Or Ken & Co. Now, Ken & Co. or Ministry of Security wants to get an assurance that, hey, whether Dropbox is having a proper set of controls, right? So they ask Dropbox to produce a SOC report, right? And while producing SOC report, Dropbox needs to be aware that at least earlier, now they don't, at least earlier, they had hosted the entire data in AWS, Amazon Web Services. So they host the data in AWS, whereas the application is pertaining to Dropbox, and the users are Ministry of Security, Ken & Co, Microsoft, LinkedIn, whoever it is, right? That's the context in which we are talking of, right? I hope this is making you very clear, right? So when you look into your organization, very important, when you look into your organization, that is where the scope of SOC 2 is, right? Which means we are saying, hey, Dropbox wants to go for a SOC 2 report or a SOC 2 audit. Don't use the word SOC 2 certification, we rather use the word SOC 2 audit, right? So that's the wording. Now, while using the SOC 2 report, right, this is the scope of your audit. Understand one very important thing. Dropbox uses certain services provided by Amazon, and Amazon in this case is referred to as sub-service organization. I repeat, sub-service organization. That means it is not only you who have to work effectively, Amazon also has to work effectively so that your services to the user entity, which is Microsoft, Ministry of Security, Ken & Co, is successful, right? That's the context. And when we look into SOC 2, we are focusing on the central pillar, which is basically the usage of this. I'll give another example, right? Most of us on the weekend, we spend at least probably about 30 minutes to a few hours on Netflix, just relaxing. Let's take Netflix as an organization. Hypothetically, presume that, of course, Netflix is a SaaS model, but with it's an entertainment industry, right? So you subscribe to Netflix services on a monthly basis, and you get access to it for a month, whatever, for a year, whatever, X, Y, Z. Now, Netflix is hosted on Amazon, right? Hypothetically, presuming Amazon is down for some reason, your Netflix will not work, right? I mean, it's too big to fail. That's a different story, but I'm just giving you the context. So, which means the scope of SOC 2 is normally your organization. It may or may not extend to sub-service organization depending upon scenarios. We will come to it. There is also an element of a user entity controls which Netflix or Dropbox expects its customers to enforce, right? A classical example of that is, let's say, the user login and monitoring, right? So assuming you had the Netflix username and password and you wrote it somewhere in your hostel PG or your office, and somebody saw that and started using it, right? And you could not, you cannot go to Netflix and complain, hey, somebody else is using my credentials. Of course, you could enable a security like a multi-factor authentication. That's a different scenario, right? I hope you are able to get a sense of what I'm trying to say, right? So there are certain controls which the user entity has to enforce. We will address that. So now that I'm presuming you are reasonably clear on what a SOC 2 scope is, right? We quickly move on to understand what are the types of SOC services just for reference, and we'll focus predominantly on the SOC 2. So the SOC suite of services, right? If you ask me, you have for service organizations, which we are speaking of. We have something for cybersecurity and supply chain. That's not the topic for today's discussion. Maybe reserved for some other day. And within SOC, you have SOC 1, 2, and 3. A 1 is something called internal control over financial reporting. A 2 is based on trust service criteria, which I'm going to explain in the following slides. And SOC 3 is a generalized use of a SOC 2 report. Bear in mind, only a SOC 1 and a SOC 2 have got further classifications called type 1 and a type 2. And what is type 1 and a type 2? This is where you remember I told you design and operating effectiveness, right? Now let's take an example. Going back to my initial case, right? You wanted how secure is Gmail and how do I rely upon it? So Gmail appointed one service auditor, CPA firm, let's say Kenenco. I wish we had the opportunity, right? So we were assuming hypothetically auditing Google, right? And when we audit Google, we go on the day of audit, Google gives us all the evidences, and we say, everything looks okay, right? And we issue a report. But then you as a user would have a very interesting thing, right? It's like the traffic police who is there and you are in the signal and you know that it's early morning. You may probably want to break the signal, but because there's a traffic police, you are there, right? And the moment the police leaves, okay, nobody's watching me and I just go ahead, right? I'm just giving a very jovial example, not to give any hard and fast sort of thought process, right? So given this scenario, how do I ensure that the compliance is there over a point in time and not as on a particular date? That's exactly where a SOC 2 type 1 is different from that of a type 2. In a SOC 2 type 1, or as a matter of fact, even in a SOC 1, right? Any type 1 report, let me repeat, any type 1 report is purely a designed report as on a particular day, which means I take August 31st and I check what are all the controls as on August 31st and I audit you as of August 31st. That's the end of the story. I audit you as of August 31st, and I may give you an opinion on September 1st, second week, third week, whatever, but I give you an opinion as on that period. And that is what a SOC 2 type 1 is. Whereas, imagine a reader is going through it. He is very comfortable that you have certain good set of controls and practices. Great. But what if you just implemented all of them on August 29th and within 3 days you are able to achieve compliance and you showcase, right? So it's a design audit. To give a very illustrative case, you have seen sometimes that, when some of the VIPs are coming for a visit, the roads are kept very clean, or maybe some of the times when you know that the senior management is coming for rounds, everybody is a little cautious. After that, nobody bothers. So, how do I get an assurance that it is not just one day, it is for a particular period? And that is where maturity comes into picture. A maturity is a scenario that for a particular period of time, you are able to demonstrate compliance. And that's the beauty of it for a particular period of time. And this period of time is generally 6 months, but shorter period is accepted provided a justification or a reasonable logic is given by the service organization. And in a type 2, the beauty of a type 2 report is not only do you give an assurance on the design, you also give an assurance on the operating effectiveness. Plus, the CPA audit firm shall give a test procedure on each of the control defined by the organization. Let's say we speak of physical security, we speak of logical security. The CPA firm gives an opinion on each and every point mentioned in that. And he gives an opinion. We verified, tested, dot, 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 and we noticed that out of 5 days, right, out of 25 days of sample, 5 days we noticed that the entity is not compliant. Now imagine a reader of this report. Would he get a better assurance? The answer is absolutely yes. Right? And that is where a type 2 report comes very handy. Right? We've had cases where even one sample, if it is failed in the larger set of things, of course we do a risk assessment, but we have to report it. Why? Because the reader gets an assurance, hey, there is something which is failed here. I need to be a little more cautious, or I need to check if there is follow-up procedures on that. And that's a type 2 report for you. Right? Just to quickly summarize, SOC for service organizations 3, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3. SOC 1 and SOC 2 have further classifications of type 1 and a type 2. What is a type 1? It's a designed report as on a particular day. Type 2, it's an operating effectiveness report as not on as a particular day, it's for a particular period, along with the auditors or the CPAs, audit step procedures and the results. That's the beauty when it comes to a type 2 report. In a type 1, you just talk about design. Now, just to give an example, sir, we have been talking about design, operating effectiveness. Can you make it a little simpler with an example? Here it is. Let's say you are using a GitHub repository and you are having a branch where you're making a change and you want to commit that change to a production environment, right? Which is a typical DevOps process or code committing process, which most of you do. Now the interesting question is, I did the code change and I am the person who's moving this change to the production environment and I am the same guy who did the testing. Now, look other ways. Look probably from two step backwards. You are the same person who's doing the change. You are the same person who's approving the change, and you are the same person who's pushing into production. What if certain things was missed by you, right? And this is where a control you define, saying that the change shall be done by one person, may be tested by another person, and approved or committed by a third person. Or if you have a smaller organization, the change committed is done by a different person. It could be your colleague, that doesn't matter, not always supervisor, but somebody else commits the code compared to this. And this is a classical example of a change being committed. Now, if I do one particular test walkthrough, okay, show me one change. Are you doing this? You're doing this? Yes, go ahead, approved. That's a design audit. Okay, by design, you have a policy and you're doing that, right? But what is operating effectiveness? Go back for a historical period, go back for 6 months, go back in 3 months, pull out all the changes which you have done. For each of these changes, check whether you're compliant or not, right? If I made 1,000 changes, are you going to check 1,000 changes? Well, not really. We would go based on what is called as a sample size, and we drive based on the sample size, right? So that's a typical approach which we follow, right? But having said that, many of the startups and also many of the consultants have told me, uh, for a SOC 2 Type 1 report, I have a policy that is sufficient. My dear friend, only a policy without implementation is like your New Year resolution, which you make on 1st January, right? It's working only on the 1st January and not for the rest of the days, right? Maybe I'm just giving as a jovial example. So even in a design audit, right, you need not just have the policy, you need to have a proof of implementation of the policy. Very, very important. The second question, which many of the startups or consultants come and say, hey, it's a design audit, we have the policies, do we also require the SOC controls? The answer is yes, because the AICPA standard says you need to have a system description and a control description. Both of them are necessary. Further details we will be looking into the slides to come, right? I'll just pause here for a minute, right? While you look into this particular slide, I'll just pause here for a minute. And if there are any questions, maybe Saina, I could request you to just bring up those questions if there is any. Or if you feel what are the use cases, how it is, how do I achieve compliance? Those are covered. Any questions so far in terms of what we have spoken? Yes, you could go ahead and share it across. And you could message in the chat. We will pick it up. And in the meanwhile, if you are able to enjoy, you're able to make some good sense out of it, maybe you could just go ahead and give a thumbs up, or just saying that yeah, it's going well and things like that, right? So that's where it is. Saina, I'll just pause for a few seconds. If there's any questions which has come up, we could take up.
Sure. Narasimhan, uh, we have one question from Mr. Kostav Ponce. Do we have any standard controls list like ISO 27001, PCI DSS for SOC 2 as well?
Very interesting question. Very interesting question. Um, Controls are not defined based on the AICPA requirement, or rather the AICPA does not say, hey, you need to have these 5 controls or 10 controls like a statement of applicability in case of an ISO 27001. What AICPA defines is something called as the COSO framework, and point of focus, where it is written based on the trust service criteria. It is written a few things, which if you can give me about probably 5 to 10 minutes, I will cover in the slides to come. Right? So there is nothing like a list of 100 controls you need to define, but there are certain principles which AICP has come up with. We will go ahead and understand that. The other interesting question which many of them ask is, SOC report is equivalent to a bridge letter? No, no. A SOC report is an independent report. I repeat, it's an independent report issued by the CPA firm, right? Whereas a bridge letter is an assurance letter given by the management. And generally, bridge letters are given when your SOC 2 report is still in progress, or let's say your last SOC 2 report was of December or September 2023 or 22, and let's say they want an assurance for the next 3 months, October, November, December 2022, as an example, right? And your next audit, let's say, is going to be scheduled only a year later, right? So you're just giving that interim comfort, saying, hey, there's nothing major which has changed from that date till this date, right? That's basically a bridge letter. Please note, a bridge letter is not a replacement for a SOC 2 report, because a bridge letter is a letter issued by the management and not by the CPA firm. So I hope so that sort of helps it, right? I'll probably take one more question and we'll quickly move ahead in this landscape. Any other questions, Anna, which has come up?
Yes, Narasimhan, so we also have another question. Can you explain ICFR SOC 1 report and how exactly we need to report?
Okay, fair enough. That's an interesting point. Let's say you're a service organization which is doing certain activities which has a financial impact on your customer. Meaning, a simple use case. You are processing payroll of your customer. Now look at your customer. He has his own financial auditor who is sort of going through all his financial numbers. One of the significant number in his P&L account is salary. So obviously he wants to have a control how is salary processed, managed. And what does your customer say? We don't manage salary. Here is our vendor. He takes care of it. It's not my responsibility. So can the auditor of your customer, okay, so it's not your responsibility, so no problem. Can I sign the report? The answer is no, right? He would want to get an assurance whether you, as a payroll processing organization, are having sufficient controls, or you, as a payroll processing organization, have reasonable knowledge or have reasonable control over systems. And that is why your customer or your customer's auditor, whoever, would ask your organization to issue a SOC 1 report, which is on internal controls over financial reporting of whom? Of that particular customer. So, generally, anything which has an impact on the customer's financial reporting process, if that process is given to you, then you would be asked to produce a SOC 1 report. And there we use a criteria of ICFR, which is basically something called as IT general controls and application controls. That's another day's discussion, but I hope I've given you perspective. But when it comes to SOC 2, we use what is called trust service criteria. We will be covering it in a few slides to come. Right? So I'll probably pause over here, or I'll just take one step backwards, because I think I've given you the basic context. Let me move a little further so that you're able to get some more perspectives, right? So
Okay,
how do
Narasimhan,
I,
we'll take one more question because
please,
lots
Madam.
of questions are flowing in.
Okay, okay.
So, and also to let everyone know that at the end of the session and in the middle of the session, also, we will post the Google form. Please fill in your data so that you can be contacted if you're interested for more updates on this subject matter. Okay. So, the next question we will take is there any possibility COBIT will be followed in the SOC 2?
The simple answer is no, because Corbett follows a different protocol compared to that of a COSO. So the entire SOC is based on the COSO framework. While I understand between COSO and COBIT there is some bit of a mapping, but the simple answer is no. COSO is pure. SOC is purely based on the COSO framework.
Okay, Narsimhan, thank you so much. I think you can move ahead. We'll take the next set of
Sure,
questions again when he
sure,
pauses. Okay. In the
sure.
meanwhile, please fill in the form. We are sharing it both in YouTube as well as LinkedIn. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Great.
Over
Thank
to
you.
you, man.
So quickly, one of the questions which, as a service organization, you ask, hey, what sort of a report should I go? As I said, if your report, that is the SOC report, is used by your customer and their auditor for the purpose of their financial reporting, it's SOC 1. If your customer or stakeholder just wants to get an overall comfort, you go for a SOC 2 or a SOC 3. But if your customer wants to understand the detailed processing elements, the controls, and how the auditor is tested that, the gold standard is only SOC 2, and within that SOC 2, type 2. Right? I think we spoke about it. So now that we've got some insights of this entire game of a SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, right? Of course, SOC 3 is a generic use report. I would probably say an extracted version of SOC 2 is a SOC 3, and that's how it is, right? Coming back. Now, if I have to go give you some more insights into SOC 2, right? How does it work? The very first question is, what is this trust service criteria? What am I audited against? What am I subject to, or what is it that I have to showcase? Because security is a very, very vast word, right? I could have antivirus software and say I'm secure, right? I could have a firewall and say I could be secure, right? So, what are we talking of, right? What are we talking of? So first and foremost, in SOC 2, we have what is called as the trust service criteria. And the trust service criteria is based on 5 broad principles. And what are these principles? The first and the most common is security, also called as common criteria, CC, right? This talks about a lot of requirements from a security perspective, from a governance perspective, from a logical access, a physical access security, from a network, right? A lot of those things are spoken in this particular principle. The second principle is on the availability. That means, is your product or your service available at the required, or that means there is no unauthorized hampering of your solution, right? There is nothing like a denial of a service attack. There is a disaster recovery system in place, right? So that's where we focus on the availability. And then the third most common thing is confidentiality. That is whether the data what I'm sending it to you, is it confidential? Things like encryption, things like access, things like firewall, all of those comes into picture. So these three are the most common, and if you see any of these larger companies, including the likes of Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they go only for these three criteria, right? For reasons best known to them. The next interesting criteria, which you could probably consider, is processing integrity. A processing integrity refers to a scenario where the quality of processing of your data comes into picture. And this is normally applicable when the customer gives you an input, you process and give an output. Right? Example, the customer gives you raw transactions, you are processing and giving some analyzing results and a dashboard and other things. That's where a processing integrity can come into play. Right? So that's processing integrity. And then when you come into privacy, I think today we all know that this is the new kid in the entire block of security, right? Of course, security and privacy are two different things, probably two faces of a same coin, right? An example is, I could have your information in my pizza example, right? If you recollect, I could have your contact number safely secure, but I could keep on sending you messages and calling you, right? So security is taken care, but privacy is not taken care. So privacy is more to do with how we are talking about your rights, your privacy policy, and other elements. And as a service organization, you have the liberty to choose any 5 of them, or any one of them, or all of them. That's your choice. But security is mandatory, which means if you want to go to SOC 2, security becomes mandatory. The rest of the four, you decide based on contractual clauses, based on commitments, whatever is the scenario, you go ahead and define based on that, right? So that's the principal criteria. But the next question, many of them ask, hey, you're saying that ISO standard has controls, Corbett has some requirements. Does COSO framework have they given any of them? The answer is yes. They have given based on what is called as total trust service criteria. The main principle is security, availability, confidentiality, PI, processing entity, and privacy. Each of them begins with the first letter. So controls or domains relating to A starts with availability. A dot, it will say A dot 1, A dot 2. Confidentiality will be C1, C2, C3. Processing entity will be PI1, PI2, PI3. Privacy will be P1, P2, P3. And security will be CC1, CC2, and CC3. So there is a list of this trust service criteria which you notice over here, and that's basically what we are referring to. On the right hand side, each of this trust service criteria is further bifurcated into point of focus, right? Please note, I did not use the word control, I've used the word point of focus, which means I could have one trust service criteria to give an assurance on the trust service criteria. I may have 4 point of focus. I'll cover that. Just hang on, stick on to it. I know it's some bit of time, but I think I'm taking you logically step by step. Hope you would able to appreciate it, right? So 33 odd service criteria, of which 214 point of focus. And look on the other side. Privacy has 18 odd criterias and 51 point of focus, right? And all of this is based on the 2017 standard. However, I think 2022 there was an amendment which talks about additional point of focus, which I've not covered here because it becomes too much for you to digest at one point in time. So therefore, I'll probably take one step backwards and say, hey, do I need to have 300 controls in my organization to be completely SOC 2 compliant? Not necessary. You define 100 controls, 15 controls, 25 controls. That is not a matter of consideration. But those 100 controls should meet your 302 point of focus, which if you are going for all the five criteria. If you're going only for security criteria, even if you have defined 100 controls or 60 controls, 50 controls, those 50 controls should meet the 214 criteria requirements. That's basically the essence. And that is the role of the CPA auditor in this entire game, right? So that's the makeup of service criteria. Now, what does the service criteria say? It says you need to have policies, you need to have communication, implementation, you need to have procedures, and you need to have a monitoring principle. So these are broadly the four components we say from a trust service criteria perspective. You need to have policies, backed by policies, you need to have procedures. Procedure and policy could be integrated. You need to have a communication mechanism where it's clearly defined who is responsible, who shall do what, how it shall be done. And very, very important, you need to have monitoring, review mechanism, how you do that. And that's how you achieve compliance against these trust service criteria. While we speak this, it is also worthy to look into certain related terminologies. We did make a mention, right? Because we're going a little more deeper into SOC 2, and then we'll come into step-by-step compliance steps, right? So first, I think we spoke of sub-service organization. In my example, Amazon was providing services to Dropbox or Netflix. So Amazon is treated as a sub-service organization, right? A service organization used by another service organization. And typically these are vendors, contracts, etc. Remember, I might be using hundreds of service organizations, but not every person will become a sub-service organization. Let's take a very simple scenario, right? You are working in a co-working space. So maybe to a limited extent, the co-working vendor is taking care of who can come into the office and go out. So to the limited extent of physical security, he is responsible. So he is a sub-service organization. But in the co-working space, there is a facility management, there's a security, there is some, facilities, janitors who takes care of those cleaning facilities. They are no way related to your services, what you're rendering. So they would not come as a sub-service organization, right? So typically for SaaS-based companies, who are your sub-service organization? It could be players like Amazon, your Google, or your AWS, Azure, right? These players. B, your email service providers. C, your Git repository. And if you're using any other automation solutions for rendering your services, those players could be a sub service organization, right? So the interesting question is, as I told you, Netflix will not work if Amazon is down. Dropbox will not work if your um, uh, Amazon is down, right? So then comes a very interesting question. I'm just giving again example of Amazon or Google just for the sake of educational purpose. Nothing that from personal preferences or something like that, right? Coming back. So the real question is, if Amazon or Google or somebody like this is down, what happens to this underlying application, right? And as a service auditor or as a service organization, you have given a commitment that I'm 100% available uptime, but Amazon is down, that has an impact on you. So how do I give an assurance? And that is where complementary subservice organization controls come into play, right? So we say that, hey, no doubt Dropbox is going to ensure this, but in addition to Dropbox ensuring this, there is also dependency on Amazon, and if Amazon fails, Dropbox may not be able to assure this. And this is called as complementary subservice. That means in order for my controls to work, my friend's controls or my subservice organization also should be operating effectively. A classical example is physical security at Amazon data center should be operating effectively. Only then, my systems are actually secure, right? Or my physical security at co-working space like WeWork or anybody else, right, is working, operating effectively. Only then, to some extent, my services are compliant, right? So this is called as complementary sub-service organization. Typically, if you're using an infrastructure or any other cloud service provider, it is taken care of, right? So that's a CSOC. Then comes an interesting question. If I have a third party like this, do I need to consider the third party services also here? Right? And that is where it is very interesting that we use two methods, an inclusive method and a carve out method or an exclusive method. In an inclusive method, you audit the service organization as well as sub-service organization. That means you audit your startup along with your vendors, along with your Amazon or Google or GitHub. The challenge is, do you think they would give you the data for your audit? The answer is no. They will say, here is my list. Go ahead and read whatever you want. Therefore, the most practical use case today we are seeing is a carve out method, where in the carve out method, we are saying, hey, we are going to restrict, or we are going to say, hey, this is what we are going to audit, and this is something which we will not touch, right? So that's basically your carve out method. Then comes a very other interesting terminology. We spoke of complementary subservice organization controls. Now we have what is called complementary user entity controls. That means those controls that you expect your customer to implement. A classical example is, you give a console to your customer, you expect your customer to give access to only employees on a need basis. And when employees on a need basis are given the access, that means the customer has to revoke their access when they leave the organization. And these sort of controls which a customer should enforce are called as complementary user entity controls. That is, the user of your software or solution or your product or your service has to enforce certain controls, and that is what it is. Another example, you are a payroll processing organization, your customer gives you valid payroll data, only then you can process the information. Let's say he did not give you the termination date and you still went ahead and processed an employee's salary. Boss, you cannot hold me liable because you are supposed to give me those details. And that's where user entity controls come into picture. Remember, even if the user entity control fails or subservice organization controls fails, the overall service delivery could have an impact. So you're clearly calling out that these two papers are not my responsibility, are yours or the respective people's responsibility. So that's a sort of a disclaimer, that's a sort of a call out. At the same time, it should be carefully called out because you cannot say everything is that person's responsible. You have to be a little cautious on that. The other most common question which I get, hey, I am an ISO 27001 compliant organization, therefore I can become SOC 2 compliant tomorrow itself. I'm afraid not. It could be, but I'm afraid not. Why? Because ISO 27001 is an information security management standard. It has something called as a management requirement, clauses 4 to 10, and then annexure controls, which talks on, of course, the 2013 standard versus the 22 standard, there's been some changes, whatever it may be. But if you look from that angle to your SOC point of focus, right, you would notice that only about 56% or 53%, as the case may be, are mapped, right? Which means you still have a good 40 odd percent additional things to do, if I have to put it in simple language, right? But look at more practical terms. You having an ISO 27000 is a certificate. Of course, the certification issuing agency should be accredited with IAF, International Accreditation Federation, or something on those lines. It should be accredited with that. Only then you can do it. But what they issue is just a single piece of paper which has your scope, objective, what is that, and you issue a certificate. In case of a SOC, whether it's a type 1 or a type 2, it's a mature report. It's a mature report which talks about the system, your information, your processes, and all of this is available to your customers. So you can imagine what is the level of confidentiality and level of detailing which is there, right? And that is where a SOC 2 is considered more mature. Furthermore, a type 2 is way more mature than a type 1, because you're talking about operating effectiveness, and B, you're talking about auditors test procedures, right? And that's basically how it is done. And this is again general mapping given by the AICPA framework. This keeps on maturing. The 2022 standard mapping framework is not given by the AICPA. Probably, over a point of time, you will get that. So I hope I've clarified the air on 27001 versus probably SOC 2. Next, a few most common questions which I keep getting. Can anybody sign a SOC 2 report? I'm afraid not. Only a CPA with a valid license can sign. And how do I verify whether he's a CPA or not? Very simple. Take your CPA's details, go to this website called cpaverify.org, type the details, you can verify whether the CPA is valid or not. As simple as that. cpaverify.org. You could go there and check whether you could go. He's a competent person to sign it or not. Also, you also need to check with the board. So in India, like how we have the Indian country as a national and states have certain powers. Similarly, in US, you need to register with a state board, let's say Arizona, or let's say Delaware, or Montana, Washington. So you need to register with a particular state. When you register with a particular state, the state, when I say you, I'm talking about the CPA, right? Sorry, beg your pardon. The CPA has to be registered on a particular state board, and only in such cases, right, you would be eligible to issue a report. The state board may have restrictions that the CPA who's signing from this state can attest only companies operating from here, or the CPA who is registered with the state can attest only companies who are outside of the state and not within the state without a registration. So there could be a lot of requirements. So please be a little careful with that. Next, one of the very popular question. I need SOC 2 only for a product or only for a process instead of a whole company. The answer is yes, but you have to design certain things accordingly. And I'm afraid whether fully we'll be able to accomplish and do justice, because there are certain things which you have to adhere at an overall perspective, because there are certain things from a governance angle, right? So when it is only a governance angle, you cannot say only the governance is there for this particular department, other departments is not there, or policies are there only for this particular department and not there for the department. So that becomes a little challenging, but doable for a short period of time. Longer point may be very difficult. Very interesting question. Can an Indian chartered accountant sign a SOC report? No, the answer is no. He cannot sign. Full stop. Indian chartered accountant can only sign under SAE 3402 under the Indian CA regulations, which is equivalent to a SOC 1. There is no SOC 2 equivalent under the SAE 3402. Only the AICPA standard has that. Can a CISA sign a SOC report, or can a cybersecurity, CISSP, all these people can sign? The answer is simply no. They can do all your assessment, implementation support, etc. Only a CPA with a license can sign it, right? Interesting question. What is the difference between a firm and an individual CPA? So again, as I said, some of the firms or some of the state board says only a CPA firm can sign, right? And firm gives more accountability, more sense of assurance, right? So that's why we are a Kenenco CPA LLC. So we are limited liability corporation set up in Montana, the US, right? Set up as a firm, right? And probably in our path of getting our, our peer review also done to give more credibility, right, in terms of the processes to our customers to say, hey, we meet your requirements more than what you have an element of doubt, right? Let's quickly move on.
Narsimhan, in this context, I have a very interesting question. People have the general curiosity that why a CPA? He is coming from a financial background, and how does he have got to do anything with information security?
Very, very valid question. I got this question myself. I started doing so much research that eventually became an IT auditor, right? Because I was thinking, what is the role of technology for an auditor and things like that. So I can only think of two reasons. A, from an overall perspective, this is an audit at the end of the day. An audit is a domain of an auditor, as simple as that, right? That's the first thing. Second, the only authority which is given this framework in this entire world is an accounting body, which is an AICPA. None of the cybersecurity organizations have come forward with a reasonably comprehensive setup like this. And bear in mind, you could say, hey, we have ISACA, we have Cloud Security Alliance, we have A, B, C, we have CISSP. Great. All of them focus on a particular domain, right? It is like, I always ask this question, right? You go for a full body checkup sometimes, right? Now, what is the definition of full body? Is it from head to toe, or it is based on certain key parameters they have defined, right? So that's basically the sense of it, right? Coming back over here, you could obviously ask a question, how can a CPA who is an accountant be competent to do it? And that's exactly why credentials of a CPA matter to you, right? For example, we as a CPA firm, our core expertise is only on IT audit, right? Of course, we do some bit of a financial work that is probably a very minuscule. Our core expertise is IT audit, technology controls. Name it startup, name it AI, name it robotics, RPA, we have audited. And that we have chosen as a domain of specialization, right? So A, we combine the skill set of an accounting, an auditor requirement. B, we combine the requirement of technology skill set. And C, we see how these emerging trends and all these things are coming together and trying to do the audit. And that is where you need to be very, very careful while choosing a CPA firm, because he or she should also understand your line of business, right? Because if somebody says, show me evidence of backup in a case of a, SOC solution or a SaaS provider or an infrastructure as a service, we'll have to reassess how it is done, right? Or I want to see who is the person who has access to data center. In today's world of Microsoft, Google, right, where we have completely cloud sourced everything, literally physical security is no longer my forte. It's no longer my baby. The entire focus is on our friends like Amazon, Google, right? So I think to some extent I've tried to answer the question. It is A, based on the guideline which we spoke of, which is your AI CPA requirements, which is recognized SSAE 18 as a standard under which the SOC report comes under. And because this comes from an AI CPA, only the CPA can attest it. It's another matter the CPA can have additional expertise, right? For example, we have that skill set, or he could have team members who have that sort of an expertise. Both of them are sort of possible. Hopefully, I have answered that question, and I know we are nearing the cutoff time. I'll probably take a few more minutes before we wrap up. So, question is, how do I get started? I understood this entire ocean of things. What is the next step, right? So, to get started with stock, first understand, does your organization or your entity requires a SOC? What is your objective? Your objective is predominantly based on the user entity requirement. And who is the user entity in this case? It is none other than your customer. So if your customer is an enterprise customer, he would have in your agreement signed an SLA saying we want this. If your customer is, let's say, someone to do with, privacy related domain or a healthcare related domain, he might be very finicky about how he is sharing the information. So understand the user entity requirement. Second, understand the scope of audit. Do you want to go for a SOC 1, SOC 2, or a SOC 3? Next, what is the level of detailing? Do you want a type 1 now and 6 months down the lane you go for a type 2? That's a very well measured assessment. You could directly say, hey, I'll go for a SOC 2 type 2, but probably you're keeping things on wait for a very long point in time. That's something which you have to decide, right? Because many of them ask me, do I have to go for type 1 only after that I go for type 2? It's your choice. But just that you implement certain controls which will take about, let's say, 1 month's time, and you put them into practice second month, and then your audit period starts. Because if I audit for the 2 months, you're non-compliant, right? So from your third month only I can start your SOC 2 type 2 period. So better go ahead with implementation, put things in place. End of 2 months, here is my SOC 2 type 1 report. Wait for some more time, complete all those extra masala which you want to do, get all the evidences, go for a SOC 2 type 2. That's a more mature way. I've also seen an interesting trend which is taking place where some of them go for ISO 27001 and then after 3 months to 6 months go for a type 2. It is okay, but please bear in mind the gap between an ISO 27001 and a SOC, right? The requirements obviously are a little different. Now, what are the trust service criteria we need to cover? Security is mandatory, the rest of them is your choice. I think we spoke about. Then also look into it that do you have any regulatory compliance, any concerns, any requirement? You might be operating in a healthcare industry, you may be operating in a privacy domain, GDPR, all of those. So understand from a user entity, because that should also transition within this. And next, you need to do a readiness assessment, right? And this is basically where you decide whether what you have, what you don't have, are you good to go. While you do this, you also start drafting policies, right? Policy, procedures, practices, start putting them, right? And these policies need not be 100 odd pages. You could just have 2 to 3 odd pages on every setup, and that's more than sufficient. The most common policies being your information security policy, access policy, acceptable usage policy, change management policy, HR practices. Those essential things become very basic. And today we are in an era of a chat GPT, right? You go ask chat GPT, it'll give you all those policy content. So I don't think you require so much. But yes, make sure that it's simple and comprehensive so that you're able to adopt it, right? And very, very important, you need to prepare these two mandatory documents. I'll give you a quick perspective of this. System description as per trust service criteria, section 100, and SOC controls as per its section DC description criteria, that's what DC stands for, section 200, right? So these two are mandatory, right? And this is where the core is. I'll speak about a few minutes, from that. And the CPA you appoint, right? Ken and Co or anybody else whom you feel like, just giving an example. You appoint them as a CPA auditor. We ask list of requirements, we document those results in our work paper in acceptable format, and we prepare a SOC report. A general SOC report, a type 1 report has got 3 sections. The first section is auditor's report. Second section is a management assertion. In a SOC 1 or SOC 2 or a type 1 or type 2, all the scenarios section 1 and section 2 are same. Section 3 is system description. Again, in a SOC 1, SOC 2, type 1, type 2, the system description is same, but the content would vary. If it is a SOC 1, the requirements will slightly vary. SOC 2, the requirements has to be based on system description, TSP section 100. What is required? I'll just cover it in the next slide. And then comes very important SOC controls. You remember we spoke of point of focus, 302 odd point of focus. That has to be translated into controls. For example, your entity is ABC. ABC has a background verification process for all employees, consultants, joining my organization. That's a control, right? Or you could say there is a code of conduct policy. Every change committed in GitHub is subject to an independent peer verification. That's an example of the system description and the control description. I hope you're able to get that. Sorry, that's an example of a control description. And that control description is based on DC section 200. I hope that's clear. And of course, the CPA does this audit, right? So how does this look like? Preparing the system description. This is the guidance given by the AICPA. It's available in the AICPA website, but I think it's either you need to be an AICPA member to download this, or you need to make a payment to get this. You can go and figure that out. DC section 200, which talks about the description criteria. But what I've done is I've tried to summarize this entire thing into a slide. Right? It talks broadly about 9 to 10 odd things, and this is purely textual information where DC1 says basically overview about you. What is the nature of services you provide? Are you a data controller or processor? Your address, your department, your product overview. Basically all about you. So that a reader gets a sense, oh, this is what ABC company does. Second is a very, very important thing, principal service commitments and system requirements. Right? This is basically what are you as an organization committing to the end customer. You could be committing that we are available 99.9%, right? Something like Dettol or Liboy does, right? Or you could say that all my personal information is encrypted. That's your commitment. You are following a password, SHA 256 algorithm, whatever. Your commitments come up there, right? Please bear in mind, whatever you committed, you are being audited, right? First. Second, what are your system requirements? You can talk about your system workflow, your overview, your data flow diagram, just that, somebody is reading, he gets that. The third is a very, very interesting section, and this talks about infrastructure, software, people, procedures, and data. The crux. This is where I get to know how your system works, right? You may have a cloud model which is hosted on the customer's cloud. You can have it in your own cloud, multi-tenant, single tenant. So many models are there, right? So infrastructure, you could have it something hosted in a data center. We do not know the software which you actually are. What are the softwares you're using, right? How is your people, your org structure? What are all the policy procedures which you have? And what is the data you collect? What is the data you process? And what is the data you give as an output? Interesting sections. DC4 talks about system incidents, a low priority, but it is, I think, something necessary, what all you need to cover. And then you have DC5, what is the trust service criteria you are going to choose, and what are the controls against that, right? Of course, these sections you can interchange and present, but this has to be there. Please bear in mind, in a SOC 2 Type 1 report, the controls is a part of section 3. In SOC 2 Type 2 report, controls will not be mentioned in section 3. It will be mentioned in section 4, because along with the controls, the auditor's test procedure also will be mentioned. So from ease of presentation, SOC 2 Type 2 will have all the controls in DC5. Right? DC 6 and 7 is CSOC and CUEC, complementary subservice organization controls and user entity controls. DSC 8 is sort of, a corollary to DSC 5, basically what is applicable and not applicable. And DC 9 is more to do with significant changes which has taken place, right? So these are probably, you can say, the 9 things which has to be covered. Is there a format and template? You can Google it, you will get some information relating to this, right? And of course, in our playbook, we will be sharing some sort of an indicator scenario about this, which we will address it in the days to come. Next, preparing the control description. What is to be there in the control description? And this is based on TSP section 100. And this is what it is, an example. And this is how your controls are defined. COSO principle 1. I remember I told you CC 1.1. This is how it is. The entity demonstrate integrity and ethical value commitment. And what is the expectation of the standard? Here is the expectation. There should be a tone at the top. Meaning, there should be a policy or a board of directors or a governance mechanism which say, I am adhering to this. Next, you have a code of conduct or a standards of conduct, right? And you adhere to the standards of conduct. Now, this is where you could merge the requirement 2 and requirement 3 to one control. ABC organization has established a code of conduct, which is every individual has to agree to at the time of joining the organization. Violations, if any, are periodically monitored. So this control takes care of requirement 2 and 3, and this is what I'm referring to as combining controls. So don't think I need to have 300 requirements. No, I could just have 80 to 100 odd requirements. In fact, we have developed a SOC framework which we use for our customers, around 80 to 100 odd requirements. And I would say about 90 to 95% of the criteria we're able to meet. Some deviation would be there. So we define some extra controls for that, right? Coming back, addresses deviations in timely manner. I think that is also related to standard of conduct, right? You can merge that. Interesting. Considers contractors, vendor employees in demonstrating commitment. Here it is. You can talk about independence. You can talk about how you are getting the NDA signed. You can talk about a code of conduct applicable to employees and vendors. All of them relating to the principle one: demonstrate commitment, integrity, and ethical values. Right. Let's take another example. The board of directors demonstrate independence from management. So here we're talking about the board of directors and governance. So those who are responsible for day-to-day operations and those who are responsible for governance, there is a line. There is a small thin, right? And that's basically what we are talking of. So the board of directors identifies and accepts oversight responsibility. There is some sort of an expertise that they have. They are able to operate independently, right? And there is some sort of a complementary services to the board's expertise. So that is basically an example how you can run. Now, if you ask me, the CC 1.1 and 1.2, you could probably just define 3 or 4 controls and be compliant with it. And that's exactly the job of a consultant which you get started. And once you're done with that, you keep on going and the ball keeps on running, right? So this is just an illustrative example. I cannot take you through the entire DC section 200, but I think I gave you a perspective as to how you need to go about it. Probably a couple of last slides before we wrap up. Some key consideration: do I need to get a consultant to get started? Ideally yes, because the requirements are a little complex. So my sense is that yes, get somebody who has that expertise to reach out. Can I define the system descriptions controls by myself? You could give it a try, but the only question is, will the CPA accept it, right? Because you need to ensure comprehensiveness. And the last, do I use a lot of fancy automation platforms which are available today? That's your call, right? Because there is a fee which you pay for the platform and there is a CP audit fee. While I understand that it may be easier for you, but there are of course some challenges in sort of implementing. And the platforms work only based on a predetermined set of applications. Say for example, you're not using a GitHub, you're using some other repository, or you have your own Git or your own service code repository which are hosted in-house, right? It may not probably work, right? I'm just giving an example. So you'll have to look into those things from that angle. So automation, cost of CPA, and are you going to continue with that? What if tomorrow that service provider or an organization shut shop, and where will you have to go? So these are interesting questions which you should probably have. But having said that, I think these are some things which you have to take care, right? So what is our approach? Probably in a nutshell, I'll just give you. We typically follow a 3-step approach. Try to do what is called as a gap assessment. And once you are done the gap assessment, help you out in some bit of implementation, and there is an element of external audit. Bear in mind, if we are acting as an external auditor, we normally don't do phase 1 and phase 2. We have third-party associates through whom we do it, or they do it, and we sort of just give them a guidance, because a CPA firm shall not be involved in this. But having said that, we give you the overall end-to-end, the game over here, where we can help you out with that, right? So that's basically a typical approach. And from a timeline perspective, this is just to give an indicative sense, and it need not be the actual scenario. It could depend, but this is just for you to get an idea that if I'm starting now and I want to go for a SOC 2 type 1, I would say at least a bare minimum is 2 to 3 months. And if you're talking about SOC 2 type 2, depends on whether you want a 3-month audit or a 6-month audit. If it's a 3-month audit, your total avenue will be 6 months. If you're 6 months audit, your total window will probably be about 9 months. But having said that, this could be crashed depending upon your complexity and scenarios. But this is something too early to sort of discuss. But it is just for you to get a sense of this entire thing, right? And yes, that's about us. So we are a CPA firm having expertise in IT audits, SOC attestations, cybersecurity requirements, auditing SaaS companies, data privacy, and other things. Happy to reach out, or happy to help you out if you have any questions and clarifications. And I think that brings us towards the sort of end which we thought of or which I want to cover. I know it took a little more than an hour. I think we took about close to about 75 odd minutes for this conversation, but I hope you found a lot of value addition into this entire 75 minutes. Happy to take your questions and reach out to us for any of these requirements. Yes, I'll quickly, if you have any questions, I can probably take it. One popular question which many of them keep on asking is SOX, SOX, and SOC the same? Uh, no and a yes. Why? Because SOX is based on the requirements if you are a listed company in US, right? SOX section 404 is applicable for you, where you demonstrate internal controls over financial reporting. That's the requirement of SOX 404. Then what is SOC? It typically comes into picture when you have outsourced services to any organization or you're a service organization, right? So in case of a SOX, it's mandatory. Listed company SOX compliance is mandatory, whereas SOC compliance is voluntarily done or normally done based on customer contractual requirements, right? So that's the basic fundamental difference. And in SOC, we focus on your system description, your controls, whereas in SOX, we focus on the entity's financial reporting process. But then other question which could probably come up is SOX and SOC one the same? No, but there is some amount of an overlap because SOX is applicable for that organization's compliance and practices. And if that organization has outsourced certain activities to your organization, for you, that outsourced organization will ask you for a SOC 1, right? I repeat it. So, assuming XY is Microsoft, which is a listed company, has outsourced certain activities, payroll processing, to your company, Microsoft will be SOX compliant, right? And Microsoft, in this case, their auditors want to get an assurance on the payroll processing, which is done by you. So they will ask you to provide a SOC 1 report. The nutshell is SOC is always on the service organization, and service organization is an entity who helps you to achieve or to whom you have basically outsourced certain activities. Sorry,
Thank
does
you,
that
Narsi.
help? I have been helpful, hopefully, in giving you some perspectives.
Yes, absolutely, Narsiman. I think you have covered most of the questions. I'll just take up one from Joseph Benedict, who says, "Do I need to implement all the TSC before I can get certified?"
Okay, A, do not call SOC as a certification, it's an audit, as I told you. B, TSC is purely your optional. Which criteria you want, you could choose, but mandatory criteria is only one, which is common criteria, also referred to as security criteria.
Okay. Next is from Kunal, who says, "What will be the sampling size, population size of samples while testing? For example, what will be the percentage of samples to be taken for incident tickets in the audit period of SOC 2?"
Interesting question. This is purely based on risk. So the general sampling methodology, we follow the sampling standard, which is given by AICP and which is sort of universally accepted by the global standards. It is based on risk of material misstatement. If the risk of material misstatement combined with the frequency of a control. So if a frequency of a control is quarterly, let's say an access review is done quarterly, and the risk of misstatement is low, we take 2 samples. If the frequency of control is quarterly and the risk of misstatement is high, we take 3 samples, right? That's just one example. You could have a control which is operating daily. You could have a control which is operating weekly. You could have a control which is operating as and when required. Like, for example, only when the employee joins the organization, I may do it. In all those cases, we see the overall population. From the population, we decide normally the size, but generally the highest size would be 60 samples, the highest, but that is for an annual audit. If you're doing a 6 months, obviously reduce it by 50%, but that's on the higher side. A low risk generally would be anywhere between 10 to 50. That's basically how it is considered. Again, there's no one answer which fits all, depending upon a case by case.
We will take another one. Will SOC 1 compliance be sufficient to fulfill CSAE 3416 requirements?
3416, I am not too sure whether it meets the requirement, but SSAE 18, SSA 3402, you can definitely meet that. 3416, if it is relating to outsourced country operations, then yes. The only difference is, I think, CSAE, I think, is based on Canada requirements. Many of the organizations across Canada have said that if you are a SOC 1 or SOC 2 compliant, we will rely upon that. So I think it's a good thing unless there's a very, very specific scenario which you want to cover.
I think, Narsiman, it went past our time. That's all because it was a very, very engaging session. People are pouring in their compliments. I should let you know that it has
Thank
been an
you.
amazing session.
Thank
To
you.
all the others, fret not, the recordings will be available and it will be shared in the comment section of this event in LinkedIn. And you can also subscribe to Ministry of Security's page in LinkedIn as well as YouTube. You will find the webinar there. So the recordings will be there. So please fill in the Google form because it seems you are really interested to have more updates from Narsimhan and team. So please fill up the form and you are there with us. Thank you. Thank you so much for everyone. And from the whole team of Ministry of Security, Narsimhan, thank you so much for the lovely session.
Thank you so much. All of you have a great weekend ahead and hope I've added a lot of inputs into your curious mind. Thank you. Be in touch. Take care. Happy weekend.
Happy weekend and a very happy Ganesh Chaturthi, which is approaching. So, really good, amazing festive time to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you
care.
for attending the session.